Hi everyone. Alright, so we're going into radicals now with I. And you might be thinking, what is I? Is that just a letter? And in math, I actually represents an imaginary unit. And the unit that it represents is the square root of -1. So whenever there is a square root or a negative number inside of a square root, it actually ends up becoming an imaginary value. We're going to try a couple of these problems, kind of taking back what we learned about radicals and imaginary numbers in a second and putting it together. Alright, so first thing that we do here is the following. We know that we have the square root of -16. Well, we know that -1 times 16 is going to give us a -16. But we should also recognize that we can break down 16 to 4 times 4. And remember that all we need is pairs to take out anything. And so I'm going to go ahead and circle my pairs, or highlight them actually. So here's my pair. So that means a 4 is going to be coming outside of the radical. Now we also know that square root of -1, which I'm going to circle as a whole, is I. So an I is going to be coming out. So our final answer is 4I. Alright. This might be a little bit overwhelming, but we're going to kind of keep going with it until you kind of get the idea of what this is. Alright, so let's go into square root of -64. I'm going to go ahead and break down -1 times 64. And I'm going to break down 64 more because I know that -1 times 8 times 8 is also 64. Now, I tend to stop as soon as I see pairs, so here's a pair, so I know that one of the 8s will be coming outside. So here's an 8. But I also recognize that square root of -1 is I, so the answer is going to be 8I. Now, notice that in both of these, we have negative values inside the square root. Okay? And that's when the I tends to be coming out. I. Okay, so just kind of side note for yourself. Alright, let's look at number 3. So I'm going to break down number 3. We have -1 times 12 is -12. So I'm going to keep dragging the -1 down with me. Well, I know that 6 times 2 is also 12, but I know I could break down the 6 more to 2 times 3, and the other 2 should come down. Now I do see a pair. I'm going to circle my pair. There it is. Okay, so a 2 is going to come out. I also see that the square root of -1 is I, but the 3, I'm going to highlight the 3 really quick so you can kind of see it. The 3 does not have a pair, and it's just left inside of the radical, so we're just going to leave it underneath the square root. So this ends up becoming our final answer. Alright, great job. Now let's look at number 4. Number 4 is square root of 45, and it's positive. So I'm not going to say -1 times 45 because it's not negative. So I'm going to break down the 45. Well, I know that 5 times 9 is 45. But I also know that I can't break down the 5, but I can break down the 9 3 times 3. So here it is. I have a pair, which is what I want always. I'm looking for those. And so I'm going to go ahead and take out the 3. And since 5 is alone and it doesn't have a pair, it's going to stay inside of the square root. Notice that in this problem, there is no I because the 45 is not negative. So no need for I. Alright, let's look at number 5. We only have 4 more problems to go. So in number 5, it says 2 square root of 8. Well, once again, it's 2 is on the outside, so I'm going to keep it out there. I'm going to expand the square root a little bit. I know that 4 times 2 is 8. So I'm going to keep dragging all these down with me, but I also know that 4 can be broken down to 2 times 2, and I don't want to forget about this other 2 that's there. So notice that I have a pair, so let's highlight it. Here's my pair. So a 2 is going to come out. Okay, well, let's keep track. There's already a 2, so I'm going to just bring this down. Then these two is going to give me another 2 on the outside. This one is solo, so it's going to have to stay inside of the radical. Well, since I know that 2 times 2 is 4, it's nicer to write 4 root 2 and say that's your final answer than to leave the one above. Okay? Great work on that. Let's look at this one. We have a 6 on the outside, so let's keep it there. We have square root of, I'm going to break this down to -1 times 4. Now, I also know this is a 6. I'm going to drag the -1 down because I can't break it down anymore, but the 4 can be broken down to 2 times 2. Here's a pair, yes, so we're going to take that out as well. Now 6 is already outside. This 2 is now going to come outside because it's a pair, and then we have the square root of -1. Well, that's an I. Notice there's nothing else left inside, therefore we are pretty much done. All we have to do is multiply 6 times 2, get 12I, and we are done. Great job. Alright, let's look at number 7. I'm going to expand it out a little bit. I'm going to break down square root of -1 is -1 times 17. I don't think there are two numbers that multiply to 17 other than 1 times 17, so I'm not going to break it down. But I do recognize that square root of -1 is I, so I'm going to take out an I outside. And 17 doesn't have a pair, so it's going to have to stay inside of the radical, and this ends up being my final answer. This is a tricky one. I want you to star that one. That's a great one to study before exams. Alright, let's look at our last problem of the day. So here is number 8. We have 2 square root of -8 times root 2. Well, 2 is already outside, and we know that we can put these inside of the same radical, so -8 times 2. And let's start breaking them down. So we have the 2 on the outside. Don't forget about that. You know, sometimes I forget, I'm getting older. So we have -1 times 8 is -8 times the 2. Alright, now we know we can break down 8 more, so I'm going to just kind of take the necessary steps. Bring everything down. 8 can be 4 times 2. I don't want to forget about this 2, so I'm going to bring it down. And I see that I can even break this 4 down, so I'm going to keep it going. -1 times 2 times 2. And then I have 2 extra ones here, so I'm going to write those down as well. And I'm pretty much good to go. Now let's see. 2, this 2 is already outside. I see that we have these right here, so a 2 is going to come out. Another one. Okay. Now I also see another pair right here, so I know that another 2 is going to come out. Okay. Then we have this one, which is the square root of -1. Well, that's going to be our I. Okay? And notice that there's nothing else left in the radical, so no need to write it. So all we have to do is do 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. And I comes down, so our answer is 8I. Alright, well that's all for today. Thanks for checking in and watching the video. Great job. Could you please write "You are the best" on your notes, please? And I can't wait to see you in class. Great job.